But first, while the new government's getting plenty of kudos for its foreign policy, particularly bicycle diplomacy now between Australia and Indonesia, fair enough. Internationally, at least, I don't think the Prime Minister's put a foot wrong. But at home, Labor's economic and energy policy is being mugged by reality. Inflation now over 5% and set to rise further. Today's interest rate rise up 50 basis points to 0.85%. Was all a bit inevitable. And while another increase 1 month on from the last should not in itself tip borrowers over the edge, it's bound to be just one of a series of increases that's likely to take mortgage rates up to around 6% or double what we currently pay. And that's certainly in the ballpark of what the analysts are predicting. Meaning, of course, that the annual cost of servicing a $500,000 mortgage is likely to go from $15,000 a year to $30,000. Extra money that'll have to be found at a time when everyday costs like petrol, bills and food are already biting hard into our take-home pay. Sure, there's extra spending the government promised during the campaign, spending on aged care, on childcare, energy infrastructure, but all of that's borrowed money. And even if they account for it off budget, it means it's going to add extra pressure to rates. Now, a serious deregulation agenda to reduce business costs could help, but it's a long time since Labor governments worried more about red tape strangling small business than green virtue signalling. We'll talk to Ross Greenwood about all that news today, but let me tell you, there is no easy or quick fix. Add into what even government ministers are calling this perfect storm on energy prices, we're in a lot of trouble. Because the Ukraine war and the embargoes on Russian gas have cut supply. They've put prices in Europe through the roof, and Australian power prices, your electricity bills, as a result, are surging by 20% for starters. But without more gas, or without a shift back to coal-fired power, the sky's the limit on these increases. Anyone who's had a blackout during the current wild weather knows what it's like when modern life is totally dependent on electricity. Without power, it's not just the TV and the lights that don't work, it's the hot water and the heating. You can't even charge your phone. When South Australia had its statewide blackout a few years ago because the wind there at the time was too strong and the extension cord with Victoria was cut, and the last coal-fired power station, you'll remember, literally blown up in a PR move by the previous Labor government, everything in SA stopped. The traffic lights went down. People were stuck in lifts, and no one could buy anything because the tills in the shops weren't working. And you think, wouldn't you, that the highest priority of any government would be to ensure our power supply was affordable and reliable. But that's not the case, because for the past 2 decades, we've run our power system to reduce emissions and not with an eye on the national interest. Now, it's a lie that renewables, as they are today, are cheap. We don't have wind and solar now producing around 20% of our total power because it's cheap and reliable. It's cheap enough, sure, when the wind blows and the sun shines, but it's always there to be firmed, usually by gas, which is why power bills are up 100% on a decade ago. All of this is for one reason only, and that's to reduce emissions. Judith Sloan, as I said, on the show in a minute, she'll explain how we got into this mess and how, if we're smart, we might be able to fix it. But as the new government is now finding out the hard way, you can't endlessly cut emissions and you can't keep demonising fossil fuels without also creating a power crisis. Today, the Treasurer admitted that we're in for a difficult winter and an expensive winter.
It will be a difficult winter. It will be an expensive winter. We are in the midst of a full-blown cost of living crisis. And electricity prices and gas prices are unfortunately part of that pain.
Origin Energy has warned too that smaller electricity retailers face collapse. Here, as in Britain, some are already telling their customers to go elsewhere. After spending the election campaign telling us that the most important task is to reduce emissions, today the new Energy Minister, Madeleine King, said the most urgent task is to get more coal-fired power stations back online.
What we really need to do is to have the coal power stations come back online, because that is the missing piece in the puzzle right now. There's been unplanned outages.
Good Lord. I mean, she's right, of course, but it's a total contradiction of Labor's previous positions. In the long run, by far the best way to keep the lights on and emissions down is nuclear power. This is the debate we have to have, especially now that we've decided to have nuclear power at sea in our new submarines, but still not on land. And with that new polling from the IPA that we covered off last night showing that there's a 53% support out there for nuclear and only a 23% round of opposition, what are MPs afraid of? The government's eager to debate entrenching into the Constitution this Indigenous voice to the Parliament, but it's not even prepared to debate the principle of nuclear power. Now, come on, Australia, we have got to get serious.